Hi, I'm Dr. Bartuska here at the Florida Aviation Network, and today we're going to be talking about the meteorological aspects of mountain flying. Okay, meteorological aspects of mountain flying. We're going to talk a little bit about high altitude flight, density altitude, and the hazards of mountain flying. Mountain flying meteorology is a very complex subject. I'm about to do in about 20 minutes what would normally be done in an all-day or an all-semester class, but we're going to hit the high points. Why are we here today? The General Accounting Office has concluded that aircraft are 40% more likely to crash in the mountains than anywhere else. The critical role of mountain weather has also been revealed by the Colorado Department of Transportation and the Colorado Division of Aeronautics, who states that the biggest category of crashes in Colorado, 26%, involves loss of control in flight because of the degree of turbulence and up and down drafts, in-flight encounters with weather, and high-density altitude. Flying at the elevated altitudes required in the mountains, flying can rob an aircraft of more than half its sea level rated performance. Note, if you plan to fly in the mountains for the first time, it's highly recommended that before you go, schedule a mountain check ride and/or mountain training flight. Let a mountain flying expert familiarize you with the idiosyncrasies of mountain flying, along with the considerations of your aircraft's high altitude limitations and your own high altitude aeromedical limitations. Doing so may save your life and the life of your passengers. Now, this is a excerpt from the National Transportation Safety Board. It's Part 121, Air Carrier Operations. Notice their accidents combined adverse wind and turbulence is 85% of their accidents. So keep alert here. Now, an NTSB safety alert. Pilots with limited or no training in mountain flying can be surprised about their aircraft's different performance at high density altitude, often leading to serious or fatal accidents. Wind and other weather phenomena interacting with the mountain terrain often lead to unsuspecting pilots into situations that are beyond their capabilities. Should a crash occur, a pilot who survives the crash but does not have emergency or survival gear immediately accessible may not survive the harsh environment until rescuers are able to reach the location. Now, one thing that's in all my presentations, thunderstorms are very dangerous to people and aircraft. The required simultaneous atmospheric preconditions are especially common in spring and summer in North America, and there are lots of thunderstorms in the mountain area. Now, mountain meteorology. If you ask anyone who lives and flies in the mountain, weather is considered one of the most important aspects of mountain flying. The mountains make their own weather because they're there, sometimes with hurricane force winds. An excellent example, we're going to talk about Chinook winds in a minute, but on January 17th, 1982, a severe wind event took place in Boulder, Colorado. Wind gusts of 118 miles an hour and later wind gusts of 137 miles an hour on top of the National Center for Atmospheric Research building. Just to put that into perspective, 137 miles an hour is a Cat 4 hurricane or an EF3 tornado. Now, just a quick update on what I'm going to be talking about. Mountain weather in a nutshell. We have these waves that get created going over the top of the mountains that create lenticular clouds that I'll be talking about, and the high density altitude can rob an aircraft of half its performance. It can take twice as long to take off. You've got to be familiar with the high density altitude and aircraft performance in your pilot operating handbook. Now, where are the mountains? Well, certainly the Rocky Mountains and the Cascades and the Sierra Nevada mountains out west, but the Appalachian Mountains, and particularly up into New Hampshire where Mount Washington is, these are the places that we're going to be talking about specifically. And here's a relief map to show that in a little more detail. For my talk today, because most of the information that's readily available online is about the Rocky Mountains, the Colorado Rocky Mountains, that's mainly what I'm going to be talking about. But look at this picture carefully. Those mountains are hard. That is rock. Think concrete if you run into it. Now, mountains, meteorologically speaking, are physical barriers that force the local winds to change course, either speed up, slow down, rise, or sink. Most U.S. mountain ranges are oriented north and south, while the prevailing winds are usually from the west. This causes winds to rise over the ranges, then descend on the other side. That descending or leeward is where the Chinook winds come from. On these ranges, the west side is the upslope, or the left-hand side of that picture, or the windward side, while the east side is the downslope or leeward side. Note, there are times when the winds are not westerly, as in the case of the Santa Ana winds, as is affecting all the fires out in California right now, and I'll talk about that in a minute. So here's a summary of what happens as the air starts to go over the mountains. As the air rises, it expands, it cools, it reaches the dew point and condenses, and all the precipitation comes out of the clouds. Then it goes over the mountains. Now it's dry, and this is where the Chinook mountain winds are. It compresses as it goes down, it gets dry, and it picks up velocity. Now visualize air moving as you would flowing water passing over and around obstacles. Upwind slopes and updrafts tend to be relatively stable and smooth, whereas the downwind slopes and downdrafts tend to be more random and turbulent. Now here's the Santa Ana winds taking place in California right now. Santa Ana winds are caused by strong high pressure over the Great Basin region of the west, creating a pressure gradient that amps up winds throughout the mountains, foothills, and sometimes valleys of Southern California. In our case right now, the winds are getting a major boost from a strong upper level low pushing southward across the state. So if you look at that picture, we have in the northern hemisphere, we have the high pressure causing clockwise winds and the low pressure causing counterclockwise winds, and so it's making all the air go towards the west, opposite of what typically happens in the mountains. Now there's all kinds of different kind of turbulence, clear air turbulence, of convective turbulence. Our main thing here today is mountain waves. Now, just like water flowing past the boulder, as the air starts to hit the mountain, it smoothly goes up it, but once it goes around or over the top, it becomes turbulent and random. Now take a look at this picture. Pretend you're flying and you want to go straight ahead. You're going to look and say, that's where I want to go. Now that might be a safe place. On the other hand, that might be the most dangerous place to fly because the wind channels and accelerates through valleys and mountain passages, also causing turbulence. We call that the Venturi effect, can double or triple the wind velocity. It can be 30 knots on the side of the mountain and 90 knots going through that valley. When crossing a mountain ridge, it's recommended to cross at a 45-degree angle to give you more time to deviate from unexpected turbulence. When flying through a valley or a canyon, try to fly on the upside of the canyon. In this picture, the air has gone over the top of the mountain and is coming down on the leeward side, so you don't want to be on the right. But on the right of the next range, the air is going up again. That's where you should be. Now, it says favorable conditions. That's not favorable for flying. That's favorable for creating a mountain wave. If the winds are 25 knots or greater, if winds are increasing with height and there's a stable atmosphere, we're going to get these waves that have rotors and lenticular clouds. Now, you may or may not have ever seen a lenticular cloud. Here is one. What's interesting about them is they don't move. How can they not move? Because the turbulent action that's going on underneath them, it's what's creating them. Stationary lens-shaped clouds, or lenticular clouds, form when stable air moves across mountains and hills at different heights for the same direction in a strong air current. The cloud base is usually 6,500 to 16,500 feet, associated with mountain wave turbulence, which is strong, gusty winds in one area still nearby, extremely dangerous. So you do not want to fly under or near a lenticular cloud. Here's a summary of their formation. And there is what they can look like in rows from above. Now let's talk about the mountain waves. When air flows over the mountain terrain, it meets certain criteria, a standing wave may result. In such cases, moving air is forced up by terrain and bounces off the overlying air mass, after which it descends to bounce off the flat ground, then continues in this manner, sometimes for 100 miles downstream of the lee side of the mountain. Because the air is accelerated over the mountains and because strong rotor clouds and turbulence often form below this moving air mass on the downwind side of the mountains, extreme caution is needed when flying in the presence of a standing wave. Here you can see that wave, here you can see the lenticular clouds, and I'm going to talk about the rotors in a minute. In meteorology, we call this a hydraulic jump. That's a term taken from civil engineering. Other engineers out there will know what I mean when I show a hydraulic jump. That's a dam structure on the top. And, okay, good. And here we see the rotor being formed. Rotors get formed as a part of that downwind stream, and they can be deadly to helicopters, fixed-wing aircraft, anything near the hydraulic jump. Now let's talk about the problems that are incurred. Mount Fuji is 12,389 feet in Japan. On 5 March 1966, a Boeing 707 at 17,000 feet was flying near Mount Fuji. There were witnesses that witnessed at first the empennage tail section of the plane got ripped off, then most of the right wing got ripped off, and the plane fell from 17,000 feet and started to disintegrate. All 124 people on board that flight perished, and our thoughts and prayers go out to those people who didn't live. The weather station at the base of Mount Fuji recorded winds at 60 to 70 knots. Satellite imagery showed formation of rotor and lenticular clouds. PIREPS, reports from pilots, numerous reports of moderate to severe turbulence, and a U.S. Navy aircraft, it was an A4 Skyhawk, recorded extreme turbulence with plus 9 Gs to minus 4 Gs. Now, some other cases. Here's a DC-8 that in 1992 encountered CAT over Colorado. Notice the #1 engine is missing. This also happened to a 747 in 1982, but I couldn't find a really good picture of it. Now, let's talk about a B-52.
Mr. Richard Curry. Dick?
Thank you, Colonel Smith. Our mission was to conduct a flight load survey to obtain and record the structural loads encountered on a routine low-level sortie. Special instruments were installed in the cockpit to record the stresses exerted on various parts of the aircraft. An 8-hour flight was scheduled along a route running from Wichita, Kansas, southwest to the Rocky Mountains. The mission called for 10-minute runs at 280, 350, and 400 knots calibrated airspeed at 500 feet above the ground, utilizing the low-level mode of the autopilot. The initial portion of the flight progressed as planned, with only light turbulence encountered at the end of the 6th leg. However, as the aircraft turned north in the vicinity of Wagon Mound, New Mexico, and began a course parallel to the mountains, the instruments, identified here in orange, began indicating increasing turbulence and heavy gust loads on the tail section. We elected to discontinue the low-level portion of the flight, and the aircraft was climbed to 14,300 feet mean sea level, where the air was relatively smooth. We then decided to continue the mission using the next speed schedule of 350 knots. Since the terrain elevation was steadily increasing, the aircraft flight path was approximately 1,000 feet above and slightly to the right of East Spanish Peak near Aguilar, Colorado. Wind at this time indicated 62 knots west component, but no turbulence was noted. Then at 345 knots, while accelerating to 350 knots, an area of extreme turbulence was encountered. It lasted approximately 9 seconds. With this model, I will attempt to show you approximately what happened to the aircraft when it was struck by this turbulence. The turbulence came in rapid, explosive-like gusts. The airplane was pitched up and yawed to the left, followed immediately by a very rapid yaw to the right and a resultant right rolling moment. This motion was opposed with approximately 80% left wheel authority. A high-frequency vibration was felt in the rudder pedals, and rudder pedal displacement gave no response. The elevator response was also very poor. The crew was alerted to prepare to abandon the aircraft. However, we soon realized that the aircraft still had marginal control. At this time, the air brakes were raised to position 1 to improve longitudinal stability, and a fuel transfer was started to maintain a forward center of gravity. Lateral control was aided by very small asymmetric power settings, which helped maintain the aircraft in a side-slipping flight attitude. After the aircraft was brought under marginal control, we called for assistance. The first to arrive was a Boeing Bayol F-100. This is what the pilots saw. Approximately 83% of the vertical fin had been ripped away. We immediately set a course for Wichita, Kansas, and developed our flight strategy. Boeing Flight Test had already recommended that the aft main gear be lowered, as this would be a stabilizing factor in the absence of the vertical fin. Any drag after the center of gravity would tend to stabilize the aircraft. Here, the outboard air brakes are at position 4, which is also an area after the center of gravity. Here, our airspeed is about 210 knots indicated, which is about 30 knots above the minimum recommended for this weight with flaps up.
We've looked at DC-8 losing an engine and a 747 losing an engine, and I presented that to you so you'd get the idea that no matter how big or small that aircraft is, if you run into a mountain wave or mountain turbulence at the top of the mountain, it could be deadly or disastrous to your aircraft. Now, mountain flying strategies. Don't fly high elevation during the hottest part of the day. So fly in the morning when it's cooler and more stable. Carefully calculate your density, altitude, and weight. You may need to reduce your load. Don't take as much fuel. Reduce the crew size, pack less baggage, or you won't be able to take off. Check your pilot operating handbook for high altitude mixture leaning instructions. You don't want to fly in rich in the mountains. Remember, high to low, look below with your altimeter. Make sure you're setting your altimeter hourly. As altitude increases, pressure decreases. This decreases the pronounced effect on flight. Engine horsepower and the propeller are less efficient. Takeoff distance will be longer, climb rate will be less, and landing distance will be lengthened. Takeoff distance almost doubles with a 5,000 foot elevation increase. Rate of climb slows with higher elevation. Landing distance increases with higher elevation. Higher humidity, heat, height result in reduced aircraft performance. Density altitude you'll calculate with your E6B, help of your pilot operating handbook. Remember, the standard sea level pressure is 29.9 inches of mercury and 59 degrees Fahrenheit or 15 degrees centigrade. There may be icing in the mountain. We've done 2 previous programs on icing. You may need high altitude supplemental oxygen for the flight crew and passengers, if any, to prevent hypoxia. And remember, at or below 12,500 feet, you don't need oxygen, but you as the pilot at 14,000 feet or above 12,000 feet for 30 minutes, you need oxygen. And if you're going to be above 15,000 feet, all your passengers need oxygen. Now, people say it can't happen to me. We can't wrap this up without talking to Steve Fawcett. Stephen Fawcett was one of the most famous aviators to ever live in modern times. Well known for world record adventures in balloons, sailboats, gliders, and powered aircraft. He became the first person to go around the world nonstop in 2002, and he held more records than anybody else at one time. However, at 8:45 a.m. the morning of September 3rd, 2007, Mr. Fawcett took off in a single-engine Champion Super Decathlon light aircraft from the Flying M Ranch private airstrip near Smith Valley, Nevada. He was never seen again to start out with. When he failed to return, they launched a search. Civil Air Patrol and National Guard searched for approximately 2 weeks. Up to 50,000 people helped the search, scrutinizing more than 26 square miles. Search cost an estimated $1.6 million. The wreckage was finally located approximately 1 year and 1 month later at 10,100 feet by a hiker. This is being presented for you to remind you that anything can happen to you, and you've got to be ready in case you crash. The NTSB report stated that the pilot's inadvertent encounter with downdrafts that exceeded the climb capability of the African. Contributing to the accident were the downdrafts, high density altitude, and mountainous terrain. So you've lost control of your aircraft, you've crashed in the mountains, now what? In the summer at night in the Rocky Mountains, the temperature can drop to low 40 degrees and in the winter, 10 to 20 degrees. So make sure you have a survival kit on board your aircraft. Thank you for listening to the meteorological aspects of mountain flying. Stay tuned for that number to get your wings credit.